Well, today we're concluding a 5-part series on guardrails. We've been talking about this over the last few weeks, and I've appreciated the feedback we've received on the series. I really am convinced that the future will look different for some because of important decisions you've made over these last several weeks to strategically place some guardrails in your life. Or maybe better said, to place some strategic guardrails in your life. And, I pray that's the case for every single one of us because there's so many advantages to having guardrails. They keep us from straying, as we've said, into dangerous or off-limit areas of life. And we can apply guardrails in so many different aspects. It can be in our relationships, our finances, our morality, our ethics. I mean, so many different areas. And what we understand is what's on the other side of the guardrail, that's the danger zone. The guardrail itself is in the safe zone. We could travel along the road where the guardrail is placed, but what's on the other side is what's so dangerous. And so with having a guardrail in place, we understand that if we bump into this side of the guardrail, it'll cause a little bit of damage, but what's on the other side would create a lot more damage if we encounter it. So we're glad to stay on this side and in the safe zone. And, if you've been thinking about putting some guardrails in your life, I hope you've taken some steps to do that. As we've said, guardrails are not about sin. Guardrails are to protect us from sin, which is on the other side of the guardrail. And the further back you stay from certain lines in life, it is a fact that the easier it will be to resist certain temptations, or I would say temptation as a whole. Guardrails are very personal. The guardrails you may have in your life would look different than the guardrails that I may have in mine. You choose where you need guardrails, and the truth is we all need them, and we all need them someplace, whether anybody else needs them there or not. And I pray that God has been speaking to you about where you need those guardrails in your life. And the reality is, culture's not going to encourage you to install guardrails. That's the truth. In fact, culture may make fun of you for having guardrails. Culture may mock the guardrails that you put in place. Your friends may do the same, but that's okay. Don't worry about culture or anybody else, because what guardrails would be about is you staying focused on your future. You're going to stay focused and tuned in on the right thing, but by putting guardrails in place, you've chosen to step back from the edge of danger. You've chosen to put certain safeguards in place. You are exercising wisdom. And I wish everybody would take this series and take this concept to heart. I really do. I know that probably won't happen, at least not 100% of the time, but it doesn't hurt a guy to dream a little, does it? I mean, I wish everybody would take it to heart and give it consideration. But here's what I'm convinced of. If you make a decision to put guardrails in place, that is a decision you will not regret. It is a decision you'll be glad you made. Now, you may choose not to put guardrails in, and you may look back with regret and say, I wish I had, but I cannot imagine an instance where somebody would put a guardrail in place and say, I regret having done that. That was a mistake. Now this morning I'm going to begin by telling you a story, and we're going to focus on Daniel chapter 6 throughout the morning, and so you can just kind of stay tuned in right there because that's where we're going to camp out. It's a story that is in secular history. It's a story that took place in 605 BC. King Nebuchadnezzar lived in modern-day Iraq, and if you've done any study or reading about him, you would know that King Nebuchadnezzar was a brilliant strategist. Whenever he would capture an ancient city, he gave his commanders some very specific instructions about how to handle the people that were taken into captivity. They would be very careful and intentional about getting the most prominent citizens, the professionals, the priests, the craftsmen, the wealthy people, and they would bring them back to Babylon. They would bring them back, the best, the brightest that they could find. They would bring them back to Babylon. And then once they did that, Nebuchadnezzar would begin a very intentional process to brainwash and indoctrinate these people that they had taken captive. That was his goal. He would put them in this training program where he would literally, first of all, strip away their identity. The goal was to remove them from their surroundings, and then he would replace their former culture, whatever that may have been. He would replace their former culture with Babylonian culture. So Nebuchadnezzar sends his armies into the kingdom of Judah. And there they conquered the Jewish people, and they took captive the city of Jerusalem. They conquered the city of Jerusalem, and they looted the ancient temple that Solomon had built. They destroyed it. This is all a part of ancient history. You can read about it in the Bible. You can read about it in the secular history books. And 4 of the people that Nebuchadnezzar captured and brought to Babylon were very famous people you've probably heard of. One of the guys' names was Daniel. Most of you have heard of Daniel. Then there were 3 guys that their stories about a fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You've heard of that if you grew up in church and went to Sunday school or vacation Bible school in all likelihood. And so these 4 guys are a part of this group that's been taken into captivity. And so, as was his custom, Nebuchadnezzar, and maybe we should just call him Neb for short and make it easier on me. And that's what I type out usually. I don't try to spell Nebuchadnezzar. That's a big one. But old Neb, he would take them into captivity, and then he would start this very purposeful strategy to strip away their heritage, undermine their belief system, and train them to live and to think as Babylonians. And so we're going to begin our story in Daniel chapter 1, beginning at verse 5, reading from the New International Version, where it says, the king, talking about Nebuchadnezzar, assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were getting, I want you to see this, they were getting the best food. They were getting the best training for 3 years. It was like they were in grad school. These were the smartest people to begin with, but now they're getting their PhD, and they're getting this 3-year tuition-free college education. And the beauty of it is it comes with a food allowance. They're getting to eat right from the king's table, and it really doesn't get any better than that. And King Nebuchadnezzar, he's got his plan. He's very strategic. He's working his plan to brainwash and indoctrinate these young men. Daniel chapter 1, the latter part of verse 5 says that they were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. So after they finished this 3-year training program, they would actually go and live in the palace and work in the palace and serve the king. And so under the circumstances, thinking about these are folks that have been they've been taken into captivity. It doesn't get any better than this. I mean, they're in they're the cream of the crop. They're the chosen ones. And so Daniel was so smart though that he saw through this plan. He was concerned about what was going on, and he was troubled by it, and so he saw through the plan. He saw the end game, and he realized what was about to happen. He realized that King Nebuchadnezzar had a strategy, and he was trying to make Daniel and his friends and all the others, he was trying to make them Babylonian. That's what it was all about. They had given him, Daniel and the guys, a new set of clothes. They've shaved their heads. They've given them a new name. I mean, Daniel, for instance, his name was Daniel, which means God is my judge in Hebrew. But he was given a Babylonian name, which was Belshazzar, which means he who Bel favors. Bel meaning B-E-L, a Babylonian god, he who Bel favors. And so this was the king's attempt to shift religious loyalty from the God of the Hebrews, which is whom Daniel served, to the Babylonian god, with a small g, by the way. So they were stripping them of their identity. They're trying to train them as Babylonians. Nebuchadnezzar slowly stripping everything Daniel and his friends believed in and everything they knew to be true. They were taking it all away, little by little. He tried to remove everything that they placed their faith in. His goal was that one day these outstanding young men would be Babylonian through and through. That was the goal, the end game. And so he envisioned them one day worshiping Babylonian gods, participating in these Babylonian ceremonies, and viewing these Babylonian gods as their own. And so his goal was to cause them to turn their back on basically everything that they'd ever known. But Daniel, he recognized something that may cause us some concern, because this is something we completely miss if we're not careful when it comes to the ebb and flow of culture, and that is the fact that compromise does not erase the tension, it only weakens our resolve. Compromise does not erase the tension, it only weakens our resolve, and I want to show you what I mean. It's not that the temptation goes away. It's not that there's no more pressure. Daniel knew better than that. Compromise does not ease or erase the tension. It only weakens our resolve. And what I mean is, when you cheat, once you decide to cheat, it only makes it easier for you to cheat the next time because your resolve is weakened. Tension's not gone, but your resolve has diminished. Same thing could be said. Once you take out your first loan, it's easier to take out the second loan. Once you compromise with alcohol or drugs, it's easier the next time. Smoking your second cigarette's easier than smoking the first cigarette. The tension doesn't go away. It's just that our resolve has been diminished. It drops a level. Once you've already gone down that path, compromise does not erase the tension. It only weakens our resolve. So here you've got Daniel. He knows what's happening. He knows what's going down. See, they've changed his name, they've changed his clothes, they've changed his environment, his habits, his schedule. Their goal, ultimately, if you really stop and think about it, their goal was to change his mind. That's what it's all about. They want to change his mind. Their goal was that one day he would completely abandon everything that he held near and dear in his heart. And so Daniel decided to do something that I want to encourage every single one of us to do, and I want you to consider doing today, and that is Daniel changed his mind. Daniel changed his mind. He made up his mind. Daniel resolved, it says in Daniel chapter 1:8, Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. He resolved. He made up his mind. Daniel made up his mind. He said, enough is enough. This is as far as I can go. This is as close as I can get. That's as far as you're going to be able to push me. Now, there's a lot of speculation about why Daniel wouldn't eat the food and drink the wine, but the point I don't want you to miss is this. Daniel established a guardrail. That's exactly what this story is about. Daniel put some guardrails in place in his life. He chose to put some boundaries. He said, this is as far as I go. And he made up his mind. He said, that's not going to happen. This is what I'm going to do. And that's what we all need to do when it comes to guardrails. We just need to make up our minds, and we need to resolve in our hearts. We need to make up our minds and resolve in our hearts. That's what has to happen before I'm going to establish guardrails in my life. I need to make up my mind. I need to resolve in my heart. Now, I realize some of you, and many of you probably, have heard this story before. You know about Daniel, and you know how the story ends. If you have heard the story, and you know it ended well for Daniel, but here's the challenge for all of us, and this was the challenge for Daniel. Daniel hadn't seen the end of the story. Daniel made up his mind before he knew how the story would end. And I want you to think about this story for just a minute. Daniel is a teenager away from home. Daniel's away from home and everything that he held near and dear. He's surrounded by the most powerful people in the world. And by saying no to this food, Daniel was risking his life. You realize that? He was risking his life. Imagine what an insult it would have been for the king to hear from these teenage boys that come along and say, we're not going to eat the food from the king's table and defile our body. Are you kidding me? I would have been, hey, you boys, come in here and sit down. Let me talk to you about something. There are guys out here that are captives that were friends of yours. They don't even get to eat. Are you sure you don't want anything from the king's table? Are you sure you want to hold that standard in place? I mean, coming along with that standard, they were being offered the best of the best. And Daniel has the nerve to say he's not going to defile his body with this food from the king's table. I mean, that would have been a total insult to Nebuchadnezzar and the whole household, and in many ways to the nation. I mean, but Daniel had made a decision before he knew how the story would end. And I don't want you to miss that point. He didn't know what was going to happen. He couldn't know. As a matter of fact, if we would speculate what was going to happen, it was probably not good. It was probably going to end poorly. But Daniel knew where this was leading, and he knew he didn't want to go there. So he made up his mind. He resolved in his heart, I'm not doing this. I'm not going there. We won't eat this food. We won't drink this wine. And I know it's going to be a problem, but we can't do it. We won't do it. And this next verse is really a game changer in verse 9 of chapter 1. It says, God caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. And this is the person that's kind of in charge. He's supervising Daniel and the others. And it says he caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. See, as you're evaluating your guardrails, you're going to ask questions like, am I really going to do this? Do I really want to go there? Am I really willing to miss out? And you're going to have to understand there are some people that are going to think you're crazy. The guys at work may make fun of you. Some of them may come up and say, hey, what changed? What's different with you? What's the big deal anyway? I mean, you used to do this. Why don't you do it anymore? You used to go with us. Why won't you go anymore? What changed? Why won't you do the things you used to do? And as you think about your life and your future and what you're going to do and what people are going to say and what people are going to think and what you're going to miss out on, here's the part you have to remember to factor in, and this is the part that I love that Daniel somehow understood. Daniel knew he needed to factor God into the equation. See, so often in life, we have a tendency to leave God out of the equation. But Daniel remembered to factor God in, and we all need to remember that we need God. We cannot do this guardrail thing on our own. We need God's strength and help and power and wisdom, and so often people fail to include God in their decision making. They fail to include God in the equation. But I want to tell you, wisdom never leaves God out. Never leaves God out of the story, never leaves God out of the planning, never leaves God out of the equation at all. Wisdom never leaves God out. Now, Daniel's story is so incredibly inspiring, if you ask me. I mean, because what happens from this point in the story, because Daniel made up his mind, because Daniel resolved in his heart, because of the decisions that he made to draw a line in the sand, I want you to see Daniel's life was changed forever. It was changed forever. Daniel's decision changed his life, and it changed his life for the better. We've been saying all along in this series, God will use our guardrails to protect us and to direct us. God will use my guardrails, the guardrails that I put in place in my life. They are there to protect and direct. If Daniel had made the decision, had not made the decision that he did, do you think we'd be telling his story today? Absolutely not. If he hadn't made the decision that he did, there would be a book missing from your Old Testaments. The book of Daniel wouldn't even be there. That whole story about Daniel in the lion's den, nope, leave that one out. Wouldn't be there if Daniel hadn't made the decision that he did. See, everything hung on a single decision. Was he going to violate his conscience and eat the meat and drink the wine of the Babylonians? And when Daniel said no, it was a defining moment in his life. And here's what I don't want you to miss. Sometimes our future can be redirected by a single decision. You may be seated here this morning, and when you hear that, you think back on your life to a specific decision that has altered everything about where you are today because it was a hinge point in your life. It was a turning point, and everything changed as a result of that day. I would tell you that there are times that every single one of us come to those crossroads and we make a decision that can redirect or direct our life. And that's why these guardrails are such a big deal. I want you to understand that. See, Daniel's future was redirected by a single decision. And so often people like to talk about, well, I want to know God's will and I want to pray for God to show me His will for my life. And that's what they're praying and they're searching for. But God's clearest direction may not come from praying that prayer. God's clearest direction in your life, it may come in a moment of temptation. It may come in a moment of trial. It may come in a moment of tension when you decide, in this area of my life, this is where I draw the line. This is where I say enough. This is where I say I'm going to take the high road. I'm not going to pass this line. This could be the decision that God will use to completely redirect your life, your academic career, your relationships, your friendship, and your life. See, Daniel had no idea what hung in the balance as he made his decision. The truth is, you and I have no idea what hangs in the balance for us. The balance of our decision this very day to establish or not establish certain guardrails. And you may think you know, but you may not know. You probably don't, because it's not always about the prayers that we pray. It's also about the decisions that we make. When I was a 17-year-old kid growing up in southwestern Ohio, I remember very vividly a specific afternoon and a decision that I made about guardrails. I did not realize at the time how critical it was. I didn't know it then, but seeing now, looking back on that 35 or so years ago, looking back on that decision that day, I would say that decision impacted my life and my future to this very day. You may be facing a decision like that yourself. My point is, and my guess, at some stage along the way, many of you are going to be able to look back at the decision to establish or not establish certain guardrails in your life, and you're going to see those as a defining moment in your life. A defining moment, and that's no overstatement. One day, you'll be able to testify that God used these guardrails not only to protect you, but to direct you or to redirect you, and it'll happen only because, like Daniel, you made up your mind. You made a decision. You resolved some things in your heart. And it could happen for some, and I believe it will, this very day, this very morning, before you walk out these doors today. See, Daniel didn't know how things were going to go. He just chose to do what was right. And God was at work behind the scenes like he so often is. And that's the truth. Don't ever forget it. See, the king's official said, hey, we've got a problem. You know, there's this problem. I'm not going to be able to let you off the hook. I'm in charge. I've been given some instructions. You're going to have to do what I tell you. You're going to have to eat this food. You're going to have to drink this wine. This is what I've been told to do. You got to follow through. And I understand you have your convictions, but if I change your diet and if I make you the exception and then your health fails, the king is going to have my head, quite literally, and so we can't do that. I mean, you can just imagine that conversation going down. And, he's responsible for their health. They have to eat. And so, but Daniel says, hey, just give us 10 days. That's all I'm asking. Just give us 10 days and let us not eat the meat and drink the wine for 10 days. If our health deteriorates, then we'll talk again. But just give me 10 days. That's all I ask. And somehow the security guard worked it out, and they gave Daniel and his friend 10 days. And those were 10 important days, because in 10 days they were healthier than everybody else. Look at verse 17. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. See, he honored their decision. And then here's how this part of the story ends in verse 19. It says, the king talked with them, and this was after that 10-day period, and found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who happened to be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's the Babylonian names that they were given. But the king talked to these guys, and he found none equal to them, so they entered the king's service. And this is the beginning of a journey that would end up making an incredible difference in the nation of Israel, in the book of Daniel, the lion's den thing, the fiery furnace, and so much more. You've probably heard all of those stories. But did you know that it all began right here in Daniel chapter 1, where Daniel put some guardrails in place in his life? That's where it all began. He put some guardrails in place, and that is so often the case. It's the story behind the story, so to speak. It began when Daniel had the courage to establish some guardrails and say, that's it. This is as far as I can go. This is as far as you can push me. He made up his mind before he knew the end of the story, didn't he? And now, here's the challenge for you and me. Are you ready to resolve some things? Are you ready to make up your mind? You know, where do you need to have some guardrails in place in your life? Are you ready to make a decision to go God's way, or are you still going to try to fight to go your way? Where do you need to have these guardrails? Is that what you desire for your life and family, the path that you're on, where that's going to take you, where that's going to lead, where you are today? Where's that going to go in the next 3 or 5 or 7 or 10 years? It's going to take you on that same path or same trajectory. And so to refuse to establish guardrails, it's not going to resolve the tension. It just erodes your ability to say no. You already know that. And that's why you have to make up your mind even before you know the end of the story. Because if you don't, The reality is you can kind of predict, at least in some areas of your life with some sense of accuracy, you can kind of predict where your story's going to end. And you know that intuitively because your marriage may be moving in a bad direction. Your finances are moving in the wrong direction. You've been perhaps grappling with addiction, and I'm going to just tell you right now, addiction never leads anywhere good, ever. At some point, your relationship with your son or daughter, it's been moving in a bad direction because you won't draw a line in terms of how much you're willing to work or how many days of the month you're going to be willing to be gone. And at some point, as you predict your own future, and for many of you, it's not that difficult. It really comes down to a question, are you going to make up your mind? Like Daniel. Culture isn't going to help you. It's not going to help you make the right decision. You have to resolve in your own heart, apart from culture. You have to resolve and make up your mind apart from culture and the herd and what everybody else is doing. You just decide if you're going to go God's way, or you're going to go your own way, or you're going to go the way of the world. Not having guardrails doesn't remove the tension. It just removes the line to where the tension is going to be. And so here's the thing, and I hope you hear this loud and clear. You have no idea what God wants to do in you and through you and with you and for you. You have no idea. And you'll never know until you do what Daniel did. And once you resolve in your heart and you make up your mind, you've positioned yourself to be used by God. And most of our greatest regrets in life could have been avoided if we had guardrails. We've talked about that. Most of our greatest regrets in life could have been avoided if we'd had guardrails, and future regrets can be avoided if we'll just establish some guardrails now, today. But you've got to make up your mind. Like Daniel, you've got to resolve some things in your heart. And regardless of what anybody else says, what anybody else does, you will put some boundaries in place. And you will not compromise. I believe God will honor those decisions. I believe He'll help you. I believe He'll strengthen you. I believe that He will use you. But you've got to make up your mind and refuse to be deceived by the lies this world is telling you. Because the temptation and the tension, it's not going away. You might as well face that. The only thing that goes away without guardrails is my resolve. And on the other side of those decisions, not to establish guardrails, your life just gets more and more complicated. So as we close this series, I'm going to invite you to drive a stake. I'm going to invite you to make a commitment. I want to invite you to respond to what the Lord's been speaking to you about today and over these past few weeks. This series is very broad on application. It could go so many different ways. I don't know what it is the Lord may have spoken to you, but I want to invite you today to make a decision that you're going to step out and obey Him. And so as we close this service, I'm going to have you watch a brief video here in a moment. I want you to listen to its message. And then Danelle's going to come and play a hymn of invitation. And we don't do a formal invitation here often, but we invite you to respond every week to what you've heard. Because you need to respond. You need to apply the truth. And so today we're going to give you a chance to formally respond. And we're going to invite you to come and kneel at an altar of prayer. And you may say, Steve, what's that all about? Is that where I join the church? What's so special about that? And I'm telling you, there's really nothing special apart from the fact, and this is what makes it special, this is just a great place to pray. And there's something also special, I think, when we make a decision to stand up and to step out of the crowd and to take a step toward God. I believe He honors that kind of decision. I believe He blesses that kind of choice. And so my invitation to you this morning is, as the Lord speaks to you, would you just obey Him? And you're in a place here, it's a safe place. Nobody's looking around saying, hey, you know what are they doing? Wonder why they went to the altar. You know, when I see somebody go to the altar, what I think, there's somebody who wants to get closer to God. There's somebody that wants to obey God. There's somebody that wants to put some guardrails in place. There's somebody that's wanting to move up and move higher and move closer to their Heavenly Father. And so we're going to watch the video, and then once the video ends, Danelle's going to come and play. And I just want to invite you to take a step in God's direction. I want to invite you to do the right thing. You were made for something great, and I don't want you to settle for anything less than God's absolute best. And whatever the Lord has spoken to you today, you just say yes. And I can tell you with great confidence, when you say yes to Him, that is a decision you will never regret. Would you bow with me, please, as we pray? Lord, in these next few moments, important spiritual decisions are going to be made. And Satan's going to slip in and whisper every lie he can come up with to say, hey, hold back, stand down, don't do it. You got to get out of here. You've got things to do. There are places to go. All this stuff that's going to try to keep us from doing what we know in our hearts we need to do. But Lord, in these next few moments, I just want to pray for a tremendous demonstration of obedience all over this place. Every man, woman, boy, and girl, every teenager to just say, Lord, yes, you've spoken to me. I'm going to take that conviction in my heart. I'm going to take that little nudge in my spirit. I'm going to take that down to an altar, and I'm going to drive a stake right there. And I'm going to say, yes, Lord, today, it's a new day. I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to make up my mind. I'm going to resolve in my heart. And today, Lord, I'm putting some guardrails in place. Today, I'm going to obey you. Today, I'm going to make Jesus Christ the Lord of my life. Whatever it is, and I know the Spirit of God can take a message like this or a series like this and apply it to our lives 1,000 different ways. But that's why we just say, Lord, thanks for speaking to us. Thanks for speaking to us individually. And so in these moments, I pray that your will be done and that you will be honored and glorified by the decisions of your people. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
I've been wrestling with purpose. What was I created for? I'm more than what you see on the surface. See beneath my skin and scars, I'm skinned and scarred. Marred and twisted, scarred by the past I need to be lifted. And sometimes I question my own existence. What was I put here for? In my seams, it seems that there seems to be more. It's like I'm a light, unplugged from the socket. I mean, do I really exist to put money in my pocket? This 9 to 5 feels like a 9 to 9. My mind entwined, I pass the time, life circles me as I wait. What is my estate? I feel like I was made for something great, and yet I can't quite put my finger on it. But when I look at my fingers and I see their design, I realize I'm one of a kind, and something created me. No, someone created me, and that someone made me for a reason. Even though it's clear the past years have been treason, I still sense this drawing, this calling, that even in the midst of my falling, there was someone who died to pick me up, someone who rose to fix me up, someone who's coming back to lift me up. And that someone is Jesus. See, God made me for a purpose, and when I delight in Him, it's brought to the surface.